Lazy, entitled, quitters. Gen Z have been labeled the hardest generation to work with. But are the people born between the 90s and 2010 really that difficult? Or do they have a thing or two to teach the world about work-life balance? I'm Anelise Borges, and this is The Stream.
In case you missed it, the generation that has popularized terms such as bare minimum Mondays, quiet quitting, and the latest lazy girl job is being required to go back to the office. I mean, we all are.
I love being a woman.
And it made me realize I don't care anymore what anybody gotta say. I'm a do me.
40 hours? That's 8 hours a day. That's half the day if you factor in sleeping. When would I have time for myself?
It's not that the new generation is more difficult to work with, it's that the older generation is more difficult to work for.
From social media trends like the lazy girl job and bare minimum Monday, Generation Z is rewriting the rules of the workplace. Many are rejecting the hustle culture and current ideals of success and productivity and prioritizing life outside of work. Managers and employers say this is just Gen Z's way of opting out of responsibility. But Gen Zs say times have changed and what they expect out of their careers should too. Today, we're going to dive into what is now a revolution. And to help me understand what's really happening here, I'm thrilled to welcome to the show Gabrielle Judge, the original creator of the lazy girl job trend, who encourages her nearly 170,000 TikTok followers to find meaning outside their careers. She's joining us from Denver in Colorado. Kwolanne Felix is a writer and a gender and climate activist. She's joining us from New York. And Danielle Roberts is an anti-career coach who's joining us from Tampa in Florida. Thank you all so much for being here today. I really appreciate you joining this conversation. There is so much to talk about. So I want to start with Gabrielle, if that's okay. Can you explain to our viewers this concept that you created, the lazy girl job? What does it mean?
Yeah, so it's a TikTok trend. So there's tons of lazy girl trends out there. So that's always been super fun to watch. And so when I was watching those, I was like, well, why aren't we talking about jobs? Like lazy girl hair routines is super fun too, but let's talk about something else, right? So that's where lazy girl jobs came out of. Really, it's a term to normalize work-life balance and have better work-life balance conversations. And Gen Z really stuck to it, hence why we saw such a rise with it on TikTok.
That is fascinating. It is a very interesting phenomenon. So the whole being lazy here is just a stereotype, isn't it? Can you run us through that part?
Of course, yeah. So I appreciate that question. It's so important to hit on the lazy part too. I intentionally called it lazy because if you look at what I'm talking about, it's just work-life balance. But if you have a work-life balance conversation in a hustle culture-centered culture, right, it's lazy. So it was more calling that out in a tongue-in-cheek way.
Interesting. Danielle, there used to be a plan. We used to be told, go to college, find a job, and you will be successful. You are now an anti-career coach. Can you tell our viewers what it is that you do and what you tell your clients these days?
As a millennial, we were taught to climb the corporate ladder and check the boxes to be successful, go to school, and regular career coaches operate on the notion that dream jobs exist. And as an anti-career coach, I believe that dream jobs don't exist and that we really need to reject hustle culture and stop centering work as the most important thing in our lives. And we really need to focus on what makes us fulfilled. And we can also do that when we are in the workplace by focusing on our engagement and our energy levels.
Kwolanne, disrupted, difficult, demanding are just some of the words that are being used and have been used to describe your generation. Do you think that they are fair?
I don't think so. I think what we've seen, especially for Gen Zers, we've lived throughout our lives, and seeing how this promise that work is everything has consistently failed us. We've seen the 2008 recession and how our parents really struggled through that. We saw that during COVID, where, especially in the United States, there were mass layoffs for companies that called us their family. And that was absolutely devastating. So I think Gen Zers, after seeing how companies, see us as it's just business. It's nothing personal, especially when they lay us off. I think we are reciprocating that and just being like, well, this is a job. This is not my whole life. And once again, with COVID, we saw that we can work from home and also still have a life, that our work doesn't necessarily have to be everything. We don't have to necessarily be in the office 5 days a week and need to work 40 hours a week for our economy to survive. So I think it's not necessarily that we're lazy. It's just that we are being realistic and looking past this kind of dream landscape of work being everything.
It's fascinating. Would you say that then the economic uncertainty of our times has a lot to do with what's happening now?
I think in a way, yes, economic uncertainty. For many young people, it is unlikely that we'll be able to have, especially after student loan debts and the high cost of rent, that we will even be able to buy a house in our 30s. So I think that the economy certainly has a lot to do with it. But I also feel like even past the economy, I think in the West, there's still this, this dream that if you work really hard, then you can, retire and go on vacation for the rest of your life. But that hasn't been true for decades for a lot of people. So I think Gen Zers, even within a good economy, I think some of those promises were a bit unrealistic.
Yeah, who's thinking about retiring anymore? Just a parenthesis here. We talked about lazy girl job, but there's also quiet quitting. And actually, the amount of concepts circulating online right now is very significant. I want you to take a look at this video we sourced from TikTok introducing Bare Minimum Monday.
A bare minimum Monday in your late 20s. You think about how bad your Sunday scaries used to be when you had your corporate job. You remember the cognitive dissonance of having the job but being more miserable than ever before. You think about the day you quit, hoping self-employment was the answer. No more boss, no more stress, no more Sunday scaries, right? You were wrong. Your stress actually got worse because you didn't have a boss problem. You had a hustle culture problem. And you burned out again. So you began to dismantle your beliefs on productivity and remove yourself from hustle culture.
Danielle, there's been a real shift in the way we see and talk about mental health here. I'm aware of the risk that I run of sounding very old. When I entered the job market, there was this pressure of just hustling, of getting as many jobs and as much experience as you could possibly get. But now this hustle culture really is perceived as not being super healthy.
Yeah, I think at the core of it, when we hustle, we abandon taking care of our mental and physical health. And without our health, we have nothing. And when we prioritize just what makes us human and what we need in terms of rest and to refill our cup to approach our work with more energy, then it is a win-win for everybody. We take care of ourselves. Our employers have lower turnover. They have reduced healthcare costs. So I think when we reject this notion of hustle culture as our ultimate measure of worth in society, and we center quality of life as the metric that really makes us all successful, that's when the world will start to change and the workforce will start to change.
Gabrielle, do you agree?
I couldn't agree more with what Danielle is saying. And her and I have had a lot of conversations about what decentering work truly looks like. And I think when I talk about decentering work, especially this whole anti-work thing that I really own, people think I hate work or I'm demonizing work. And it couldn't be further from that. When we attach our sense of being, self-worth, happiness to work, like hustle culture expects us to, it leaves us vulnerable for suffering, because a job's a job. We can't control every part of it, right? That's just part of life.
You even make your dog work, if I'm not mistaken. So you're not anti-work. You're not anti-work. But you had a career in tech before making this transition. Why did that happen? Was there something specific that happened to you that prompted you to shift the way you look at work?
Of course. It didn't even take 2 years in, honestly, which is super crazy to think about. I got my dream job, like we were talking about, parentheses, just because of the conversation that Danielle just brought up, And I was super proud. Everyone else around me was super proud. So I was like, I guess I should just keep doing this. And what it turned into was 50 to 60 hours of work a week, because what I very quickly figured out was doing really good work just means more work. And if you're going to play the corporate ladder game. So I really took that to heart, and I looked at that and I wanted to ignore it because I felt like that was more beneficial for everyone around me if I ignored those feelings that I had and I just kept hustling. But I got a concussion very shortly after that decision. So the world was like, you're actually not working and you're going to figure this out in your room. So that's where a lot of the ethos, I guess that you could call it, that I have today, it comes from those moments of actually like being able to medically leave work and have these feelings away from work. So then I got my lazy girl job. This was in 2021. So moving from a dream job to a lazy girl job. Didn't have a cutesy marketing term for it yet, barely had a following. And that's where I really got to cultivate this other type of work habits where it's like, what does it look like if we stop looking at a promotion as a indicator for success and we start prioritizing other skills like work-life balance, upskilling in a different way from conservative education that we normally take, like university, things like that. And so that's where a lot of my topics come from today.
So you were basically forced to stop. Back in the 1930s, economist John Maynard Keynes predicted that by 2030, people would spend only 15 hours working per week, while devoting the rest of their time to arts, community and leisure. Writer William Morris also had a similar vision for a 20-hour work week filled with pleasurable and fulfilling work. Here's Gen Z's take on this.
Mental health and work-life balance are in. Hustle culture that leads to burnout is out. According to a study conducted by Harris Poll and HR Brew, over 66% of Gen Zers are not vibing with their come back to work policies, and they're considering hitting the road. A UK study of over 60 British companies trialing a 4-day work week resulted in sustained levels of productivity and increased levels of employee retention. And now the girls are following suit. The US, Japan, New Zealand, and Iceland, among other countries, are trialing their own 4-day work weeks. And surprise, surprise, the result is happier workers.
Happier workers. Kwolanne, 4 working days per week, that's a very different world with very real implications. Do you think the world is ready for that?
I think certainly. Once again, during COVID, we saw our labor market completely transform in a matter of weeks. And the world didn't blow up. We survived. Our company survived. So having flexibility for workers isn't the end of the world. And I think our economy certainly is adaptable to doing so. And I think to your point as well, something that the pandemic also demonstrated is that when we talk about work and labor, there's definitely a bias towards productive labor over reproductive labor. And productive labor is usually wage labor, the labor you get paid for. Reproductive labor, such as, keeping the house clean, taking care of kids, cooking, which tends to be gendered, is undervalued. And something we also saw during COVID is actually a lot of mothers did not return to the labor market because the kind of labor inequality was really emphasized. So I think when we think about, let it be John Maynard Keynes' theory about hopefully having a much shorter work week, also considering the gendered aspects and how a shorter work week and kind of valuing labor also allows all people of all genders to fully engage in the labor market in a way that kind of honors, productive labor and the work that we get paid for, as well as the work that doesn't get paid, but certainly keeps our economy alive. None of us would be here if we didn't have parents, mothers in particular, that took care of us, fed us, and provided childcare. So along with the labor that they're doing to get a paycheck and put it on the table.
Gabrielle, what advice do you have for people watching us today?
When it comes to the 4-day work week conversation, just so I understand your question correctly.
And work in general. I believe you even have a program to actually give people other ideas with regards to the workspace.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% appreciate you bringing this up. So here at Anti-Work Girl Boss, we talk about what decentering work really looks like. So there's plenty of fun things that are happening at all times at Anti-Work Girl Boss on Instagram and on TikTok. So it's been super fun to be able to do that. But most of my offerings are always about leveraging AI. And I feel like a lot of people think that I'm going to be anti-AI because of this narrative that it's going to take away all of our jobs. Our job will look so different because of the help of AI. So when we're looking at all this unnecessary work, I just had a great conversation with a baby boomer actually on a webinar that I was at a few weeks ago. She explained to me, which I've never heard before, and this was so profound, why we have so much unnecessary work today. And it was because baby boomers needed a lot of work. They were a huge generation. They needed a lot of different tasks to be able to show and prove themselves in the workplace. That's just not how work is today. And so when we move from that mindset of busy work or unnecessary work, whatever you want to call it, into this sense of actually looking at skills-based jobs, focusing on strategy and leveraging AI, is where we'll find this work-life balance, 4-day work week, harmony, whatever you want to call it.
I want to thank Gabrielle, Danielle, and Kwolanne for joining us today. Thank you so much, girls, for being part of this conversation. Now, there is another side to this story. Gen Z is also driving a major cultural shift with regards to its relationship with labor unions. Take a look at this. Gen Z is more pro-union and pro-strike than any generation before them. That is an opportunity, not just for bridging divides within generation left, but generational divides too. And to discuss that and more, we're joined now by Joe Thompson, who led a successful campaign to establish California's first unionized Starbucks locations in Santa Cruz. They are joining us from California, and Husayn Karimi, a labor journalist and member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, also leading campaigns in the higher education sector. He's joining us from Boston. Thank you both very much for joining in this second part of the conversation. Joe, can I start with you? What made you become involved in labor unions?
Well, so when I was 16, I was actually working 2 jobs in high school just to make a living. And that was no way I wanted to live. And during the pandemic, I recognized that, Starbucks is this massive corporation that is exploiting our labor. And for me, I was, 16 years old, working 2 jobs, didn't have healthcare, and wanted to change my workplace. And I found out about the movement of Starbucks Workers United happening in Buffalo, New York, and said, I could do this. And I was just 18 years old at the time when I started organizing my coworkers at the Starbucks location in downtown Santa Cruz at Ocean and Water. And for me, it was just a matter of wanting to fight for what we believed in. And that was higher wages, better working hours, better schedules, and making sure we were safe at our workplace. Those are just the basic things that we deserve to have. And for me, it's making sure that the union is just us as coworkers fighting together and demanding Starbucks give us a better workplace.
Husayn, 2/3 of people aged between 16 and 24 support unions. Why do you think that is? Why do you think so many among this generation are actually happy about the work unions do?
Well, yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and a number of the guests previously hit on it. The prospects for young people in the job market to having a stable future are just they're bad. And so many young people can't even consider, I know myself and anyone I've spoken to who is around my age, under the age of 30, it's hard to imagine owning a home, which I think to a lot of people correspond with a stable future. And so there's this situation that young people are in where a majority of young people blame large corporations and maximizing profit as as who's responsible for inflation. Mm-hmm. And the institutions, the organization that's fighting the institutions that they feel are responsible for their situation are unions, and they're engaging in much more public fights. Unions are the groups of workers that are taking on these large corporations, like the big 3 automakers, like UPS, like AMPTP, and the big studios. And people feel like they have the power to change something, but they can only do it together rather than alone.
What is interesting here is that, as we were talking before, that there are many aspirations to what the workplace should become. But obviously then unions can bring more of these aspirations into practice, turn them into a reality. But even though 2/3 of this generation actually supports and likes the idea of unions, only about 4% of them are actually unionized, mainly because many of them are actually working in sectors of the economy where the unions are not perhaps that present. Joe, how do you go about changing that aspect?
Well, I mean, the first thing to do if you want to organize your workplace, you need to reach out to a union organizer. And that was the first thing I did when I was working at Starbucks, was reach out to the national movement And it's a fairly easy process to organize your workplace. But because of the labor law in the United States that is so geared towards protecting corporations and making sure workers don't have direct democracy and a voice in their workplace, it's hard to unionize. And Starbucks has been allowed to continually union bust at all of their locations nationwide and try and break the union. But luckily, workers have been able to successfully fight back against that. And now with the new ruling from the National Labor Relations Board and the CMEX decision, it gives workers even further power to collectively bargain. And I'm really hoping that workers will use this new decision to really move forward and kind of fight alongside their coworkers and Gen Zers who want a better workplace, who want to hold these corporations accountable and get the fair wages, better workplace conditions, and the things we deserve.
How would you guys say that issues like race, gender, and other forms of identity intersect with labor organizing in your generation? Husayn, go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nature of a union can speak to it. And union density, the statistics of, for instance, Black workers who are members of unions are higher compared to white workers who are members of unions. Part of that has to do with the industry, but another part, the industries that Black workers are concentrated in versus white workers. But I think another big part of it is the fact that a union contract by its very nature makes it's a violation to discriminate on the basis of race, gender, nationality, and so on. Mm-hmm. So it's one of the few opportunities for instance, Black workers, workers of color, to achieve a stable future. There's a video that you all are showing right now of UPS workers who were engaging in a major contract fight. UPS drivers driving jobs at UPS, I think, is one of those jobs. Mm-hmm. Auto jobs used to be one of those jobs, and I think it's now on the uptick with the most recent contract victory, where Black workers can achieve a stable future, and people recognize that.
Joe, do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with Starbucks workers, there's a significant amount of LGBTQ people that work at Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And this last year we went on Strike with Pride because Starbucks was discriminating against LGBTQ people. And as a progressive company, they claim to support the lives of our trans brothers and sisters. But in reality, Starbucks was siding with far right people who are trying to inspoke transphobia and hate against the LGBTQ community. And so as a movement, we decided that we need to be inclusive of our trans allies and brothers and sisters. And for us, it was really important that we stand up and fight for this because there is a significant amount of people, especially union members, who are trans and need the healthcare provided by Starbucks to get their gender affirming care.
And how do you see the future of labor activism, especially considering that there are so many people in this generation who are interested in being part of it?
Well, for me, I think, Gen Z is saying that we want a union. This is something that I think I've seen constantly. And this is a generation that is saying, we are going to fight back. We're going to go on strike. We're going to go on strike for the longest time. And I think Gen Z is reigniting the labor movement and bringing new energy to it. And locally, we've had, we were the first store in California to go on strike back in August of last year. And it's because we recognize that the true power that workers hold over these corporations is their labor. And withholding that labor makes it so these corporations can't make profits. And this campaign is, in its second year of trying to get a contract. But Starbucks is refusing to bargain and is not being held accountable. And currently there's a trial being held in Seattle that is trying to force Starbucks to bargain with the union. But until that's resolved, Starbucks workers are going to continue fighting and making sure that our voices are being heard so we can get a good contract and make sure all workers have a fair voice and seat at the table.
So sorry, we have very little time left. What about you? What do you see for the future of labor activism?
I mean, I think we see it on the rise, right? The labor movement of the 21st century, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic that caused so much economic dislocation and political discontent amongst young people, I think in large part contributed to the surge in interest in the labor movement. And there's this historic opportunity where 88% of those under 30 view unions favorably, see these huge public fights, see unions taking on the companies that these young people, these are the same companies or the same types of companies that they're working at. and realize that it's actually not so bleak, right? There's hope. There are groups of workers who are taking action, who are landing blows, who are making gains, who are securing stable futures, and they want that for themselves as well. And now really the task for the labor movement is to see that statistic of young people as a historic opportunity, and for not only young people to organize themselves and reach out to unions, but for the labor movement to initiate new organizing campaigns and put in the resources required to win them.
Engage, engage, engage. Thank you so much, Joe and Husayn, for taking part of the show. And thank you all for watching. Stay in touch online, and I'll see you next time.